Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. This week's episode is titled, How to Be Assertive Without Being a Jerk. So first, I think I need to address the idea of assertive communication to make sure we're on the same page about what I mean by that. A little definition of terms. I often talk about assertive communication, or I would say communication in general, as lying on a continuum from passive communication on one side to aggressive communication on the other. So if you could imagine a line that moves from the left side of a page to the right side of a page, where passive communication strategies are on the left side and aggressive communication strategies are on the right side, assertive communication is that sweet spot in the middle that is neither too passive nor too aggressive. And so let me define the extremes so we can define the middle. I'll say that passive communication is any communication strategy that lets you walk on me or lets another person walk on you, meaning that you totally acquiesce to the other person's needs, wishes, whatever, and you don't really put your needs or wishes on the table. Aggressive strategies would be the opposite. It would be where I'm so pushy or confident or demonstrative about my needs and wishes that your needs and wishes don't get on the table. Or I would say if you're in communication with another person, you're so focused on your needs and wishes that there's not room for the other person's needs and wishes to get addressed. And if you look at communication as a two-way process, where at least two people are involved, then what I'm proposing is assertive communication is that little sweet spot in the middle where both of us have our needs and wishes understood and addressed. Now, since communication is a continuum, there's probably not a single assertive communication strategy. In fact, when I've done research on assertive communication strategies, read different books on assertive communication, practiced assertive communication, observed how people communicate in different situations, I would say there are actually many techniques you can use, and there are some guiding principles that really make all of them work. So that's what I'm going to address today, really the guiding principles, not the specific strategies or the techniques. And I'm going to suggest that even when we attempt to be assertive, because it's a continuum, it's not like three distinct points, passive, assertive, and aggressive. It's a line with different points on the line. And if assertive communication strategies are somewhere in the middle, then some strategies can lean a little bit more to the passive side, and some can lean a little bit more to the aggressive side. And there are some that are probably right in that perfect sweet spot in the middle. In a perfect world scenario, we would hit the perfect balance all the time. Frankly, that's easier said than done because you can mess it up with bad tone or body language or bad timing or any number of other things you can do either from your behavior or in your timing choice that could make an attempt at assertive communication to not go all that smoothly. And I'm going to say that there are no silver bullet or panacea approaches, just some guiding principles. So let's talk about the three biggest guiding principles. I won't even say this is probably not even a perfect list. It's a good way to get started in terms of how to be assertive without being a jerk, how to strike that balance between being too pushy and too soft, between being a doormat and being a jerk, trying to strike that sweet spot in the middle. Again, it's not perfect. It's just moving in the right direction. So here are the guiding principles. First one I would say is to separate the behavior from the person, or another way to say that is to separate the behavior you observe from your story or interpretation about the behavior. Let me give an example of what I mean. I'll say that we perceive a behavior as rude is saying that I'm separating my interpretation from the behavior. My interpretation is the behavior is rude. So I perceive a behavior as rude rather than say that the person is rude. Another way to say that is to say that another example would be, that I interpret or you interpret a tone as disrespectful or a word choice as disrespectful or maybe a timing as disrespectful rather than the person is disrespectful. So we're separating the story or the behavior or the interpretation from the person who did the behavior. I might say that another way to look at that is, or another example would be that you feel angry or sad, or I feel angry or sad, rather than the person made me angry or sad, or made you angry or sad. So the emotion is true that I can feel angry or sad. It's not really true that the person made me that way. It's the story I told, it's the interpretation I attached to it that made me angry or sad, not the other person. So the idea is to separate the behavior from the person or separate the behavior from your story or interpretation. That's a guiding principle. Another guiding principle is to do the best you can to focus on the future more than you focus on the past. And basically the idea behind this is talking about, thinking about, focusing on how you would like it to turn out the next time you ran into this situation rather than focus on how the last time turned out. And I had a whole podcast episode on focus on the future, so I won't dig into that too much. The point of this is to be assertive without being a jerk. We want to have conversation about things that the two of us can do something about. We want to be hopeful that we'll have a better outcome in the future. As Napoleon Bonaparte said, a leader is a dealer in hope, which means I want to find ways to communicate with people that create hope rather than sadness or desperation or frustration. And the more we can talk about how we can turn it out in the future, which is something we can control, rather than discuss how it turned out in the past, which is something we can't control, we move in the direction of creating hope in the conversation. We are both hopeful that it will be better in the future. No guarantee, right? But it's hopeful at least. So focus on the future more than you focus on the past is a guiding principle for assertive communication. Another guiding principle is to talk about solutions more than you talk about problems. That's kind of like focusing on the future. It's a related idea. And the idea behind this is to have statements that are something like this. Here's what I propose we do, rather than here's what went wrong. Here's what I would like to see, rather than here's what frustrated me. So if we can shift the conversation away from the problem to the solution, which almost by definition is in the future rather than the past, we can find better ways to communicate that convey our wishes to another person in a way that is hopefully respectful to them and honors their needs and wishes. And I guess here's a bonus that I'll add in here, that as we're having these conversations, if we're going to make them truly assertive without being a jerk and drifting too far in the aggressive direction, we also have to make space to hearing what the other person has to say, listening to and honoring their perspective. Because assertive communication is not only about getting your wishes on the table. It's also about hearing the other person's concerns, wishes, frustrations, perceptions, those kinds of things. Assertive communication is about trying to create the space so that we can both be heard and understood. Now, the three main guiding principles I talked about are things that are completely in your control in terms of how you can propose information or put information on the table and doing it in a way that hopefully is received well by the other person. And the fourth, what I would call the bonus guiding principle, is the idea of making space for the other person, listening more than talking. I probably want to pepper in questions about the other person's perspective or questions about the other person's wishes and desires, and use questions in preference to statements even. So there you go. A couple of key ideas. Hopefully that helps you find that sweet spot between being too passive in communication and too aggressive in communication. How to be assertive without being a jerk. No silver bullets. No panaceas, no promises even that if you communicate in this way, it'll be received well. It's just that if you'll follow these principles, it's more likely to be received well. And I'm a big fan of putting the odds in my favor rather than doing things that definitely don't work well. So how to be assertive without being a jerk? Follow the guiding principles of separating the behavior from the person, focusing on the future more than the past, focusing on solutions more than problems, asking more than telling, and making space to hear what the other person says to your questions or how they answer your questions. If you'll do those things, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.